podcast where we explore how race shapes our experiences. I'm Stacy Jane, a white woman and mom of two living in Cape Town, looking to challenge the systems of privilege.
And I'm Sena, a Black woman living in Johannesburg, passionate about interrogating power dynamics and the intersection of identity. Our vision: to spark candid and open dialogue for a more inclusive South Africa.
We're not afraid to have uncomfortable conversations because we believe that complacency perpetuates injustice.
Ultimately, we aim to bridge divides through empathy and understanding. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, but at least we're doing it together. Welcome to Colourful.
So Sena, on a previous episode, we had the pleasure of speaking to the phenomenal award-winning author and international speaker Buhle Dlamini on the topic of workplace assimilation. After that interview, we both walked away feeling like we had barely scratched the surface of this complex but very pervasive issue.
Yeah, that's right, Stacey. When Buhle was on, there was so much to unpack, but we were also stuck with the question of what now? What does diversity and inclusion look like practically within organizations?
Yeah, wanting to know, are there case studies we can draw from that kind of increase our understanding of how DEI efforts roll out within organizations, whether there's criticisms or barriers that we can overcome, which is why we thought it was fitting to bring an expert and giant within the DEI space in South Africa. She is currently the Inclusion, Equity and Diversity Lead for Rand Merchant Bank. She is a CA by profession and chose to change career paths to pursue her passion for people development and equality. She leads RMB's Gender Equality Initiative and has pioneered many leading diversity initiatives. She also serves as a board member of Play Africa, which is a pioneer children's museum. She is an executive coach, currently completing her master's in leadership coaching. She has also completed the Inside Gender Equality Program and Fundamentals in Neuroscience, cum laude, through the Neuro Leadership Institute. My goodness, Dharshni Padayachee, it is so wonderful to have you here on Colourful. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Just an update, I have completed my master's now.
Lovely. One other thing to add to your resume.
Okay. Amazing. Great. You have such an illustrious career, which Stacey has just mentioned, all of the amazing things. But we'd like to know a little bit more about Dharshni, the person. So before we start, could you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and your family?
Sure. So my name is Dharshni Padayachee. As you mentioned, Padayachee is my married surname. So married with two young boys, 14 and 12. We are entering the teenage years now. Living in Johannesburg, but grew up in KZN on the South Coast in a little town called Potchefstroom in the 80s, height of political uncertainty in South Africa. It was interesting times to grow up in. So without knowing it, that probably shaped a lot of what I do now.
Yeah, that sounds very, very possible, Dharshni. In a previous episode, Sena and I realized that we had kind of jumped the gun a bit by not clearly explaining the term workplace assimilation. And obviously this is not a simplistic term and we never want to oversimplify it. But for our listeners, can you briefly explain what we mean when we talk about workplace assimilation?
So I think with a lot of organizations, not just in South Africa, worldwide, we often talk about culture fit, right? So you hear organizations want people that fit into a culture. But culture is really determined by the people that are there at the time. So if you are hiring people for culture fit, what you're really hiring is more people of the same, right? If I'm different and I enter the organization, I've got to assimilate to the culture of that organization. So when we talk about workplace assimilation, we have diversity and we might have equity, but we don't have inclusion. We don't have an inclusive culture that makes me have to change some of the core parts of who I am in order to fit in and in order to succeed in the workplace.
That was such a beautiful explanation. Yeah.
So well articulated. And as you just describing there, I think of myself as someone who is also had to assimilate in many contexts throughout my life. And most of the times that decision was completely unconscious. I don't ever actively recall saying I'm going to assimilate. And often I look back and I feel angry at myself for the shape shifting, but I also know that it was important for my means for survival. And some people may suggest that, the solution is to simply just not assimilate. Can you then explain some of the real life consequences for people of color who fail to assimilate into an intolerant company culture?
So, firstly, I'm not sure it's an intolerant company culture or again, it's awareness. So, it's like company culture. We've done what we've done. We've been really successful. Why change it, right? So there's a degree of awareness in the company as well, that also we might come in with the same professional qualification, the same degree, or we might all even look the same, but we aren't all really the same in that way. When we say to people, and I've heard a lot of organizations go, we want you to bring your authentic self into the workplace. But is the authentic self really, really welcome in the workplace? And is all of me going to be welcomed? Or is some of me not going to fit in with a corporate culture or with a traditional corporate culture? So I think I've seen cases where it's been really difficult for people to bring in all of who they are. As much as we try to encourage it, as much as we try to say that this is an inclusive culture, I think for me, the really important thing is that you aren't compromising on the core of who you are. So I think, we talk about assimilation. Assimilation happens in different ways as well. It happens in maybe I have to dress a certain way or I have to behave a certain way. But I think it really, really matters. It's when the core of me differs to the core of the organization. And that's where you find a lot of people saying, I don't belong, I don't fit in. And when I don't belong and I don't fit in, I walk into the organization every day with this huge burden on my shoulders that others don't have. Because I have to use my mental capacity to think, how do I fit in? How am I dressing? How am I speaking? Not just how am I doing the job. And that's a privilege in itself, right? To be able to walk into an organization and be able to focus just on the work and not all the other things surrounding it.
That is so incredibly articulate and very accurate to say that that's where the privilege lies. And I think you've also very clearly shown us that demographic representation in the organization doesn't immediately become inclusivity.
No.
And I think that's what's quite clear as we talk about ticking the boxes. Yes, we have all kinds of people within the organization, so diversity, great, but what about inclusion? And that's why we really wanted to have that discussion with you today.
Yeah, Dharshni, and I think it was such a good point that you made, that it may just, it's an awareness issue. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. And recently there seems to be this debate amongst DEI scholars about, and practitioners about who's responsible for fighting back against assimilation. Some believe that it's the responsibility of the organization, and others say that marginalized groups actually have more power than they think and should actively work to change the organization from the inside. What is your view on who sits with the power to change?
I think it's both. I think it's an and. So, I mean, that term power in an organization is so loaded in itself, right? Because what does power really mean? Power for me, in an organization, when we're talking about equity, is decision making. So who sits with the ability to make decisions in an organization? Which groups of people are there? But we've also seen that there's huge power in employees getting together and challenging an organization. So in the work that I do, we often talk about it takes the sum of us. It's the joint responsibility of leadership teams, of our human capital teams who look at policies and processes and procedures, and every employee in the organization. So that's why we encourage a lot of our employee resource groups, right? And they always have sort of an executive sponsor as well to say this is an important conversation for the organization. And having an executive sponsor means that there's buy-in from leadership. So we are encouraging you to use your voice. We are encouraging you to challenge the system as well. So I also get that that becomes a big burden on marginalized groups, because it's like, why am I always doing the work? Why is somebody else not seeing it? So that's why I say it's a combination. It's a combination of leadership and the accountability they take. It's a combination of an awareness from employees, because you don't know what you don't know when you enter an organization, right? Like, the organization might not have that awareness. So there is some responsibility on you to create some awareness, but there's a lot of responsibility on the organization as well. You have to have leadership buy-in, though. If you don't have that, I think that, you're set to fail. And sometimes, we look to say, is our entire leadership team on board? I'm not sure. But then who are the people, who are your allies in that leadership team that can help you to take the conversations to the right levels?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I wonder if one of the challenges that you might face in those groups that are created within organizations is a lack of understanding amongst certain members of leadership for exactly how big the issue actually is, or what it looks like, what assimilation looks like. Is there a case for being able to train and teach people, or is that too simple? Is that, and sorry, a follow-up question to that is, should we believe that that is necessary at this stage, given where we are in our country's history? Like, is that even still fair?
I'd like to say we aren't at that stage, but that wouldn't be true. Certainly not uniformly across everyone. I think it still surprises me sometimes when you have certain conversations and you're like, do we live in the same world? But again, for us, it's top of mind, right? It's not top of mind for everybody every single day. So I don't believe in DEI training. I don't believe that you go into a training and you come out and suddenly you you are trained at being a DEI expert, or you know everything about everybody. I do believe there's levels of awareness. So I've never seen an unconscious bias training where people walk out and go, I'm conscious of my biases. It's always, I recognize the biases in somebody else, right? It's always everybody else has a bias, not me. And I always tell the people a story of, I do this work every single day. Gender equality is top of mind for me every single day. But a few years ago, I was in New York, and we had called an Uber, and the Uber arrived, and I could not physically see this Uber that was parked in front of me. I couldn't see the Uber because at that time in South Africa, I had never experienced a female Uber driver. And the driver in that car was female. And I just could not see her. And that's the bias, right? And bias exists in every single one of us. If you've got a brain, you've got bias because of the way you were brought up. But once you are aware of that bias, once you are conscious of it, what are you doing with it? It has to be an action after that. It's, how am I thinking differently? How am I doing things differently once I'm aware of bias? And so I think it's a process of continuous awareness within organizations, within yourselves, doing some of the work by yourself once you're aware, rather than a once-off training.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's that level of intentionality. It's the start, and you've got to continue it if you aim to have a deeper understanding, and to, I guess, in some ways, to start training your brain to see things differently. We need to have
Yes.
ongoing intentional work on ourselves. So, yeah, I agree very much with
Ongoing
that.
intentional work, and also stepping out of our comfort zones a little bit and talking to
Right.
people who might not look like us, who might not think like us.
I want to address a kind of sentiment that we believe is gaining some traction internationally, and perhaps in South Africa as well, which is that DEI and affirmative action efforts are kind of philosophical exercises, and they don't really carry any commercial advantage for organizations. Obviously, organizations are commercial at their core. So as a DEI practitioner, do you think that's true, that thinking?
So I think we all know the philosophical research, right, around diverse teams are more innovative. Um, and and what I've seen is that is 100% true. But diversity doesn't mean we have we tick the boxes when we look around the table. So in a South African context, do we have an African person, an Indian person, a white person, and a colored person sitting around a table? That is not the power of diversity. Each one of them brings in a different viewpoint based on their upbringing, based on the way they think. So the beauty of diversity comes with a cognitive diversity that those demographics bring in as well. When we look at who do we serve in South Africa, businesses, what communities are you serving in South Africa? Where are you looking to innovate? Where are you looking to actually make your money? You've got to know the problems of those communities, right? You've got to know the people that you are serving. And that's where the power of diversity and innovation comes in. I can't sit here in my office in Sandton and think that I can solve for masses of people without having somebody that represents them in the room, or without having somebody that understands them in the room. So better business solutions comes from knowing the people that we are serving, the communities that we're serving. Different ideas come from us thinking differently. But it's not just about thinking differently, it's about also being safe to challenge the ideas in the room. So I think, especially in South Africa with employment equity, we get very caught up in the compliance and the policy, but we don't actually see the business benefit that it's bringing into the organization.
Dharshni, I must just say I'm so blown away by everything that you're saying here, and it's what I like to call dropping bars, because it is so true, and it's just so insightful. And yeah, I guess I want to circle back to a little bit of the story you shared about being in New York, your experience with your unconscious bias. First of all, I want to say that to call yourself out in the moment when you observe yourself doing that is a level of mindfulness that I think is so important in the DEI space. But one of the things we're really passionate about at Uncolorful is really having those difficult conversations that even don't necessarily paint us in the best light. So to say to someone, you have unconscious bias, I've observed, the first thing they do is get so defensive. And then it's so difficult to almost carry on any sort of conversation. So I'm interested to know, within an organization, when you have these conversations about awareness and unconscious bias, you often will, I assume you run into people who I would like to call the unpersuadables or the willfully ignorant. And how do they then disrupt the whole sort of project that you try and the whole project of transforming and getting employees to feel included? And what do you do with those individuals? And how do you not feel hopeless when dealing with that? No, it's a loaded question, but I'm just so fascinated.
What did you call them? The willfully ignorant.
Yeah, the willfully ignorant.
No, I'm glad you said that, because I think what's happened with unconscious bias being, topical as well, there's a lot of hiding behind unconscious bias. And I read something the other day that was so, it actually made me stop and think. And it said that if you know what unconscious bias is, even if you know the term, then you are conscious, right? But we've never spoke about conscious bias, that sometimes bias is very conscious, right? We like to give people the benefit of the doubt. We like to say that a lot of it is conscious, but also what happens when it is a conscious bias? So in an organization, as much as I would love everyone to agree with me, not everybody does. But the joy comes with the people that are willing to do the work. And you'll find that more often than not, there are people that are willing to do the work, regardless of race, gender, all of that. There are people that want to have these conversations. What I often find is that people don't know how to enter the conversation. So I'm so scared, and I see Stacy saying yes. Like, I am so scared of what, and I remember when Stacy introduced herself to me, she was like, why would you want to listen to a white woman talking about this, right? And I think that this podcast that you two are doing is so important because I don't want to enter a conversation because I'm afraid of what people are going to think of me. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. I'm afraid of offending somebody. But actually, I do want to have the conversation. And so it's about creating spaces for people who want to have the conversations to come and have the conversations. I can't change everybody's belief. I can't change everybody's mind. But I can create enough awareness. And then it's up to you to say, is this something I want to engage in, or don't I want to engage at all? We aren't asking people to change their beliefs, but we're asking you to question, is everything that I believe 100% right? Beliefs can change as well. What I was taught in school, was that 100% right? The way I was brought up. If you asked me, I told you I grew up on the south coast of KZN. If you asked me at that point in my life, was there anything wrong? I would have said to you no, because I didn't know any different. I didn't know there could be a different way of being. So I find it's about creating safe spaces for dialogue. And safe spaces mean no judgment. And we do that here in the organization. You create spaces where people want to be part of a conversation. And then also you create bigger things where it's about events. So recently we ran like a campaign called What's in My Name? Because we wanted everybody to realize that DI is a human conversation. It's not a policy and procedure conversation. And if you can see the human being in front of you who has a name and their meaning has name, then we can have a conversation about it. And we can start somewhere.
That was so beautifully put. I was actually at an industry event yesterday, but it was for women, and it was about creating safe spaces for women. And I know in this space we're talking about more particularly about race, but it obviously extends towards marginalized groups in general, and biases. And it's so wonderful when men actually enter the conversation, when they say,
Yes.
"Yeah, I want to have an opinion on this," and because there is a big fear that if they share an opinion, what is everybody else going to think about me? When in actual fact, we're not going to start working on our conscious or unconscious biases unless we choose to enter the conversation. And now's a good time to be doing that, because there are so many places to have these conversations. People are making them. So yeah, agree. Dharshni, thank you. I don't know if you know, but I'm obviously I'm a white woman. That part you do know. I have two adopted children who are Black, and one of the things that I experience quite a lot amongst people who love me, so friends and family who want to show support, is that they say things like, "I don't even realize they're Black," or they're so part of my family, or they're so part of my friendship, and my kids love your children. We don't even, we don't see that they're Black. The very fact that they're calling out the fact that my children are Black is quite clearly the oxymoron. But what I want to speak to is a little bit around colourblindness. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and your views on it?
Yeah, so I mean, the color blindness thing fascinates me because I don't know if we've created a space where we go, it's bad to say what your color is. It's a fact, guys. Like, it's just a fact. And if we can see it like that, it's fine. Saying that I am Indian or Black, it's not an insult to me. But I think what happens is that we get caught up in this rainbow nation, we all human, and yes, we all absolutely are. But the fact is, race is socially constructed, right? When I am born Indian, or I'm born Black, or I'm born white, the minute I am born, that social construct comes into play. And every race comes with either a level of privilege or a level of oppression automatically in the world. So when you're saying that I don't see your race, I think to a lot of people, you're saying you actually don't see me. You actually don't see that if you and I walk into a shopping center together, that people look at us differently, that our experience is different. So I think, again, it's a great place of privilege to say, I don't see color. But when you get up in the morning and you do see color, there is something that comes with that, and there is an experience that comes with that. And I think it's about acknowledging that we are treated differently. And we can change that as well. So yes, I don't see color. I want all the children to be the same. That's amazing, and that's wonderful that you see the human being. But part of the human being is the race that comes with them and what that means as well.
Dharshni, I feel like I want to just pop you in my pocket, and then I can take you around with me when I'm having these conversations and say, listen to what she has to say, because I'm not sure I can be quite as articulate as that. But I love the fact that you call out the truth is they love me and they love my children. They love the human, but we can't say that we can't separate the human from their race. So I think that was very beautifully put. Thank you. And I want to just take it a little bit further into the workplace, and say, could you give us some practical advice around what we can do to help organizations who are looking to create more inclusivity in the face of the fact that white people may be defensive of those kinds of initiatives? I'm kind of looking for some very practical what now sorts of steps. We have a lot of organizations that have recently reached out to Sena and I saying, loving this conversation, I just don't know practically what to do next. And I know we will get to this as well. They can certainly reach out to you. You've got a lot of advice and on that topic. But yes, so could you share some of that with us?
I think firstly, there's no silver bullet. And it's not an easy, I wouldn't say it's not an easy process, but it's not a straightforward process. Like I said, we don't send everyone on DEI training and it's done and dusted. It's also not like a short-term thing. You're not going to see change overnight. You're going to see it over a period of time, and you've got to be comfortable with that as well. What you don't want to do is hide behind the organization is not ready for it. Well, how will you know when you're ready? The truth is, you're never going to be ready, right? You're going to try stuff, you're going to make mistakes, we're going to fail somewhere along the way as well. I think the first thing is to look at who is in your organization. Have you had the conversations with them really around what is their experience and what do they need? The other thing I want to just, before I lose it, I want to say that inclusion doesn't mean that we everything to everyone. So it means that we allow everyone equal opportunity to thrive in our organization. Because I think a lot of organizations get so caught up with, we must be inclusive, we must be everything to everyone. What if we miss out this person? What if we miss out that person? Instead of just starting somewhere. So legislatively, employment equity, race and gender is a great place to start because, largely it's what you can see in front of you, right? So if you start talking to your employees, what do they need? What is their experience? And like I said, even though you might not be doing DEI training, there is a level of awareness. And sometimes it's the executives in an organization who say, I don't know how to enter into this conversation. So how do you have a one-on-one with them to say, where are you? Because everyone's got a different DEI journey that they need to go to as well. And you often find that because executives don't feel like they're ready to have the conversation, it doesn't happen in the organization. So it's how do you get that level comfortable as well?
Dharshni, that is absolutely amazing. And as you said there, you mentioned it's about inclusion is about creating equal opportunity for everyone to thrive. And then again, looking at the practicalities of how that looks like, a lot of people would argue that, oh, well, because of legislation, we are equal and everybody has equality of opportunity. And one of the things we struggle with, because we also in our workplace sit on our DEI board, is measuring the success of the initiatives we try to push out. How do we, because the experience is so subjective, of is this an inclusive space? How do you, in your experience, have you gone about measuring like the success of the kinds of conversations and the safe spaces you've tried to create in an organization?
So I think, like I said, it's a long-term game as well, right? So you're not going to see overnight success, and that's something that you want to be very cautious of. You have to look at the numbers in some way, because if you can't measure it, you're not really going to be able to see movement. And in some ways, employment equity helps us with that. In other ways, you have to look at, like I spoke about power earlier, who makes the decisions within the organization? Are our decision-making forums diverse, for example? If we can show that our decision-making forums have changed over the years, that is a level of success. If you run an employee engagement survey, what are your employees actually saying about an inclusive culture? And not just a question on, is our culture inclusive or not? Do you feel like you belong? Why don't you if you don't? Do you feel safe to speak up? Psychological safety is really important for an inclusive culture. So I think there's quantitative factors and there's qualitative factors, and you always have to look at both. If you want true transformation, you can't just look at what our policies and what our numbers and say that we are transformed. You have to look at what is your employee experience as well. Does everybody feel like they have the same level of opportunity? If there's a role available, are we giving that opportunity to everybody equally? As a leadership team, we talk about sponsorship. And sponsorship often happens informally, where somebody that looks like me, that I can connect with, gets extra opportunity. When I talking about to somebody different, that's also part of it. Am I putting myself out there to sponsor somebody that does not look like me?
Yeah, Darshni, I think that's a really, really valid point. The informal relationships, because I would imagine that in many organizations, senior leadership might believe that opportunities are equal, but without speaking to the people who are applying for those opportunities, we're never going to know if it's being received that way within the organization, because biases will always exist, even when we believe we are following non-biased procedures. So a very valid point. Dharshni, I know Sena has too, because the two of us have been nodding and agreeing and all but sharing hearts and kisses, that we have enjoyed this episode with you very, very much. I think you have articulated some of the questions that we felt we needed to explore. I think you've articulated answers and given a really deep understanding for how it matters to everyone, not only senior leadership, and then also how people everybody within the organization can take active steps and be intentional about entering a conversation. And I think that's a really good challenge for all of us. So thank you.
That's a really important word, Stacy, intentional.
I do love that word. I try to be intentional about my parenting, and then I'm constantly criticizing myself and saying you didn't intention yourself enough. But I think simply being aware creates intention.
Thank you very much for having me. I've loved this conversation. And I think we just barely scratched the surface of it.
Oh, good. A follow-up episode is in order then. Dharshni, for our listeners, we will also include this in the episode notes, but do you want to share with our listeners where they can find you on your socials?
Yeah, probably the easiest place is to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Dharshni Padayachee. Yeah, that's probably the easiest.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. We have loved this episode. If you have loved it as much as we have, please do subscribe to Colourful Podcast. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcast. We release episodes every 2 weeks, and we would really, really love if you could join the conversation with us. Comment, share it amongst your communities, give us feedback, give us ideas on future topics. We really want to explore this conversation with you. So till next time.